Today I'm honored to have a colleague of mine. Her name is Susan Shofer with us today. Susan's a certified divorce coach. Specifically, she works with high conflict divorce, but she's also a licensed private eye, a TEDx speaker, and a national recognized expert on high conflict divorce and parental alienation. Susan and I work together. We send each other clients. If I have somebody going through high conflict divorce and they need logistics, I send them to her. She has someone going through high conflict divorce and she's working on the divorce logistics and they need some help from an emotional standpoint. She sends them to me. So we're a really great team. And Susan has helped hundreds of parents navigate the very, very painful reality of something known as parental alienation. From courtroom strategy to rebuilding connections with the children, Susan knows what to do. We'll dive into her journey on how she got there, her insights, and the actionable advice she has for anyone facing probably one of the most emotionally challenging and emotionally charged experiences a parent can go through. So, Susan, welcome. So, Susan, welcome to Flip Your Mindset. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
So, as I mentioned in my intro, Susan is not just a divorce coach and she's not just a specialist in the areas of high conflict divorce and parental alienation, but she started as a PI. Okay. You started as a licensed private investigator. How did that take you from there to specializing in high conflict divorce as a divorce coach and specializing in something known as parental alienation?
Great question. I don't know how I got here. It wasn't a concerted effort. I was a longtime agency licensed private investigator and I specialized in fraud and white collar crime, embezzlement, those type of things. I spent a lot of time in court, testified in court a lot, heard a lot of cases, and I was with a group of attorneys in DC, Washington, DC. I live near there. And they said, you're really good as like a toxic divorce consultant. And I said, bite your tongue. I'm not interested in that. I'd had my own high conflict divorce and that was way behind me. And then a couple months later, I gave a presentation with a licensed social worker who said the same thing to me. And those two groups didn't know each other. So I thought maybe there's something to that. When I went through my own divorce, I was alone with an attorney. And there were no divorce coaches or strategists per se. There were life coaches, and I met several. In fact, I, went through MySpace, whatever it was at the time, to look for divorce or life coaches, and none of them knew anything about divorce. They would talk about my best path, and well, that's lined with thorns and on my way to hell. So this was not. I realized in that moment, maybe this is something that I should do. And I ended up in the high conflict space. I started off there because most of the people that I ended up talking to were really in tough positions. So I kind of fell into that niche. And what we see almost consistently, it's a rare time when somebody has a high conflict divorce and there's children involved where there's not some form of parental alienation.
All right. So we're setting the landscape. So I'm going to go just piece by piece because I know I can always predict what my listeners are going to want to know. What is a divorce coach? Because people don't know what that is. What is a divorce coach?
A divorce coach should be somebody who is trained. Like in my case, I went to the DC Coaching Academy, and it was a 4-month program. It was pretty intensive, where a coach who understands all facets of divorce, from helping you out with your finances, of funneling you to somebody, maybe a certified divorce financial advisor. They understand the emotional side of this. They understand getting a job, getting out in the workplace if you have to get out in the workplace, how to regulate yourself if you're feeling really upset and scared. In my case, I talk to people a lot about being safe, because I understand if there's domestic violence, having been PI for a long time and being in the court system, you hear cases, even though my cases were primarily fraud, saw a lot of abuse, saw a lot of violent cases, and ways to keep themselves safe. And that's really important. And also how to behave during the process. Because a lot of our behaviors, because we're triggered to respond, sitting back and think a little bit before we jump into it. So there's so many facets, and that's what my program is about, getting somebody really into the place and getting with the right attorney. Most people, when they think about a divorce, the first thing they do is they jump to get an attorney. They call a best friend who has a friend of a friend of a friend who a coworker, and it's 6, 7, 8 degrees of separation. How they get an attorney, it may not be the right one. And then what happens? So I think, my experience, it's best to have a divorce. Like I'm a divorce strategist and coach. I always tell people you get three hats. You get the PI hat first, can't help myself. I'm a trained PI. Then you get the strategist. You need strategy. And then we do the coaching. So that to me is that's the most important because it really is about strategy.
Okay. So is your thought process this? If someone is going to go and get a divorce, that the first step would actually be to get themselves a divorce coach so they understand what the strategy is. And then you can advise them on everything from getting the attorney, getting the legal representation, getting the finances in place, and doing all the things necessary.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because what I have seen consistently when somebody comes to me, and I always recommend people do this very early in the game, because when somebody comes to me, often they've been into the process 8 months, 12 months, a year. They'll tell me they don't know what their attorney's doing. They're kind of in the dark. They may not be an even playing field. I always ask people, what kind of attorney did your spouse have? Oh, the shark, the bulldog. What do you have? I have a collaborative, I'm collaborative. I get, well, that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's not a level playing field. So what happens is then we have to go back and try and find the right attorney. Isn't it better to do that from the beginning, from soup to nuts? For a lot of reasons. Judges don't look really favorable when your spouse has had the same attorney for 2 years and you're on your fourth. Not to mention, 15 years ago, attorneys, they would take a case if they were the third or fourth attorney. I work with attorneys all the time who have said, no, I don't want to be the second counsel because they have to learn your case.
The reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you and I collaborate on client cases. And anyone who's gone through a divorce knows divorce can be very tricky. However, you and I both hold a special space for women who are going through high conflict divorce. Now, I've talked about high conflict divorce before. I'm bringing it back to the table today because it can be very traumatic. And it brings up not just the current abuse of the system and the coerciveness and the control and the power when it's high conflict, but it also unearths and pours salt into an existing wound from probably way back when, too. So, what happens is we see our clients become emotionally distraught and dysregulated during what would already be a difficult process to begin with. So you're working on what you were saying, the strategy, the logistics. I always say in the puzzle of the situation, you're doing the clear edges and making sure all the ducks are in a row, and I'm in the messy middle. You're in the messy middle too.
Very
But
much.
we're really good at collaborating with each other, and me saying to a client, hey, this is more logistical, strategic, go over to Susan. And you're good about saying to somebody, we're going too far over on this side, go meet with Stacy. So you and I collaborate a lot in this space.
Mhm.
I know the difference between a divorce and a high conflict divorce. And I know that not all divorce coaches do high conflict divorce. You do specialize in high conflict divorce. So, from your seat, what is the difference between a divorce and a high conflict divorce?
Okay. I love this question, and people really have to hear it because I get accused of being contentious. No, that's who comes to me. So let me start with what's normal. 85% of most divorces are normal. Couple grew apart, they're no longer in love, who knows? But they want to mediate, they get their lawyers, they settle up, they want to be equitable. Yeah, a little bit of fur may fly, but they really make a concerted effort to not involve the children, and they get divorced. And many of those couples will say things like, you know what, better friends now that we're not married. And everybody eats cake and things go well. And even if they don't go well, they co-parent. The high conflict divorce is very different. The other thing, little bit that's I'm going to sneak in here that I usually, this is guys, free nugget. Okay. And that is most people who have a normal divorce will say, you know what, we were high school sweethearts, we met in college, we were so in love, they were great, we got along fine. The people who are in high conflict divorces, we have a little exercise that I do in the very beginning when we start to work together. So your listeners can do this exercise. And they're getting a little freebie. That is, ask yourself, what did you see? What was the red flag you saw before you got married? And everybody has seen them. So this starts before you say, I do. You're with a high conflict person. You are with a high conflict person in the marriage. Well, what do you think they're going to be when you go to get divorced? They're going to ramp it up. And I'm not a therapist, but I've talked to enough of the clinicians in the high conflict space or in the parental alienation space, and they'll throw around words like narcissist, sociopath, psychopath. And so that 15% of the high conflict, because 85% are what I call normal divorces, that high conflict group, I break into three categories. The first is they're pretty horrible divorces. They're rotten. The second, or, third of that, 15%, they are really bad. They will do some really horrible stuff. I mean, make your hair on fire. And then there are the psychopaths. And in my career, I've had to say to somebody on 5 occasions, this is a psychopath. And we weren't kidding. The lawyers came in and it was bad, bad, bad. And so when you're in that category, there's no turning back. There's no wiggle room. There's no fluffy talk. And I'm very direct about it. And I've had to say to people, look, this is where it's going to go. I also want to add, when people reach out to me, they will say things like, I'm divorcing a narcissist. He's terrible, horrible, she's horrible. Because I get men and women, terrible, horrible narcissists. They tell me they've read everything about narcissism. They watch Dr. Omni. Okay, great, they're experts. But then I say, well, I don't really know if your spouse is a narcissist. What do I know? I've never met them. I'm going based on your word. But if they are, or if they have a borderline personality, or they're as contentious, they're threatening your life, I'm going to tell you where this is going to go. And I won't be wrong. And I'm not that smart. They're that predictable.
I think that
when Stacy,
that's the tweetable moment. They're not that smart. They're just super predictable.
Yes, not that smart. They're that predictable. And if I started talking now and went through all I've worked with hundreds of people and I've heard hundreds of cases, and I talked until tomorrow at this time, I would only be halfway through the horror stories.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, if somebody's telling me they're divorcing a narcissist, and then I say, okay, well then, I don't say they're going to do X, Y, and Z. What I say is, let's prevent down the road. And then comes the drug that you can speak about, and I know you have on your podcast, cognitive dissonance. That drug kicks in, and I go, well, then, we got to get to work. Well, he's not that bad. And I have faith that I know my children are cussing me out and calling me, but it'll all work out. No, it's not. And there are professionals, as you and I know, that will tell people, well, the high conflict person hurts. And when they hurt people. And I say, nada. They are not hurting. And if they are, what do you care? Because they're hurting you and they're hurting the kids.
I mean, look, the reality is someone who's the offender, I'll use that terminology, in the high conflict divorce, yeah, they're probably very, very hurt. In deep. I mean, I'm talking childhood, low self-esteem, low confidence, low sense of self. I have no doubt I can say that super confidently, no matter how grandiose and overt they appear. However, it doesn't really matter, because unless they're willing to do the work and acknowledge that they show up in the world in this very coercive way, in this very power controlling, manipulative way that is detrimental to everybody around them. If they're not willing to be aware and acknowledge that, it will never stop. So it's a double edged sword. It's like, yeah, we can have empathy and understanding and compassion that that person had, let's just say for argument's sake, a shitty childhood. And this is the culmination of all of that and how they learn to manipulate for love. Okay. But at the end of the day, it's not your job, spouse, to make them better, quote unquote, fix them, to be their parent. You have one job and one job only, which is to be good to you. And the only person that can be good to you is yourself in that situation. So we're asking people who tend to deprioritize themselves, right? The clients you and I work with, to actually start to care about themselves enough to prioritize themselves. And you can see from a side distance, yeah, that person's a wounded individual on the self-esteem and confidence level, but it's not your job to make that better for that person.
If I could bring in a little PI stuff, and I didn't even plan on this, but you brought something to my attention. I was in court like years ago for a case, and there was a case that really broke my heart. And it was about three young boys who at age 16 broke into a house and shot up in the house. A couple was sitting in their house. They were in their 60s. They didn't get hurt, but these three boys went to trial. And because they were young, they were given a suspended sentence, like 6 months. But if they didn't go to the parole officer, they would then get 27 months. And I remember being in the courtroom, and a young boy came in, and he was with his lawyer, and he wasn't going to his parole officer. And they had, his story, well, it's far from me, he has to take a bus, whatever it was. And I remember the judge said, you know what? Your two pals, they go to the parole officer, and you're not. And if you're not, guess what? You're doing 27 months. Now that broke my heart, because I know when a 17-year-old goes to prison for 27 months with grown men, that's not going to be a good time. He's not going to come out reformed and see Jesus and have a great life. Okay. That's just crime on crime. But judge didn't have any compassion for the war story. Okay. It is not. And so when you said it is not your job to figure them out, because if they're making your life miserable, they're not thinking about your terrible childhood. And I'll tell you something, that's real subjective. Because I've had people say I had a terrible child, like my parents didn't like me go to St. Bart. That's not a terrible childhood. And I know a lot of people who had terrible childhoods, and they don't hurt other people. They're compassionate, they have empathy. So this is something that's in their brain wiring, and you're not going to change it. End
Okay.
of story, morning glory. Your
So
job is to take care of you. No, seriously.
I love it. End of story, morning glory. I'm getting all kinds of good tidbits here. Okay. So we talked about what a divorce coach is and why somebody would want a divorce coach if they're going to go through a divorce. We've talked a little bit about what makes a difference between a high conflict divorce and a regular divorce, right? And you specialize in high conflict. Where does well, let me back it up. What is parental alienation, and where does it fit into this triangle of high conflict divorce?
Wow, that's a whole seminar, but I'm going to try to bring it down as concise as I can. So listeners, if you feel like you're dealing with it, a couple things I want to say first and foremost is there's been a movement over the past couple years that really believes that there is no such thing as parental alienation, that alienators are actually the abusive parent. They say that parental alienation is junk science. And a lot of them have been very vocal and activist about that. And I'm not going to say anything for or against that, because everybody has their own opinion. But what we learned as PIs, you have a right to your opinion, but you don't have a right to be wrong about facts. And I have seen enough situations where a loving parent, they have a great relationship with their children. Nothing's changed in their parenting methodology. And then what happens? They split up from their spouse is upset. Suddenly the children don't want to see them. They're accusing them of abuse. They're accusing them of lying to them. They're accusing them of wanting to poison them. The children don't trust them. They don't want to be with them. So we know that something is happening on the other end. So I want to clear the deck because I don't want anybody who's going through this to feel shamed or they're imagining things because they're more than likely than they're not, or more than likely they're not. So parental alienation, basically, if you just want to give an overall definition, it's when one parent turns the child against another parent. And that's the real simplistic definition. But the real meat of this is the behind the scenes indoctrination of changing the child's view of that targeted parent. And it's usually by having that child fear and not trust that parent. A child will not reject a mom because she wears mom jeans and won't not go to dad's house because he watches cowboy movies. Okay. The kid rejects parents because they fear them. So there is an indoctrination. At the core of it, it's about conditional love and unconditional love. The targeted parent is unconditional love. I love you no matter what. I'm always there for you. Conditional love is the alienating parent. What is interesting is starting in 2019, we kept records, and I'm a very science-based person. My opinion means nothing. I'm all about give me the facts, ma'am. And we started getting calls, and I still get them. Somebody comes through my website, and we now have an arsenal of 327 adults, now adults, who were once alienated kids, who had either seen my TEDx talk or saw me on a podcast like this, see me do a workshop, just found me on the internet, and they've written to tell me their story. And many of them we've gotten on Zoom. And those of the 327, because there's a lot that just wrote right to just let me know. And they're usually in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I asked 3 questions. And the first one is, which parent were you really afraid of? Hands down, 100% the alienator. And yet that's the one the kid aligned with, which falls in line with that's the conditional love parent. My next question is, well, do you have a relationship with the targeted parent? How do you feel about that parent? The guilt is unrelenting. Sometimes they're like, well, my mom's still alive, but I just don't know how I can call her. What I did to her. I feel like I was an accomplice. Well, because they were. Because with parental alienation, it takes just about 3 times or less to indoctrinate that child into the lie. And then they're doing all the bidding. At transfer, and take my word for it, I've heard it at least 100 times, if not more, where the alienated parent takes the child to transfer. Transfer, for those who don't know what that means, it's when you're changing the children. It's your week to have the children, and your spouse's week. And so the kid's like, I don't want to go with mom. So if mom's the target, I hate her. I can't stand. She's too. She wants to poison me, and she's going to turn me into a drug addict. Whatever they're screaming in the parking lot. It's now June 17th, and I was hoping Olivia would go with her mom, but she won't. Olivia, we've talked about your mom loves you. You want to go with mom. No, I don't. She's terrible. She wants to kill. I'm trying to encourage it, and she just won't go. Boom. They think they're filming for the judge. See, I take my child to see the mother. She just doesn't want to go. I hear that. I'm like, there's the crime. There it is. It's right there. There's the crime scene. I've seen it once. I've seen it twice. Because in a couple weeks, that kid does not even get in the car to do that scene at the mom's. The mom's like, well, I don't know what happened. Just a month ago, we had manis and petties. What's going on? Well, the indoctrination behind the scenes. So when I've talked to these parents and I ask question number 2, and they say, I hurt my mother. I destroyed my mother, or I can't believe I did this to my father. The guilt. And you know what's even worse? Is that parent is now deceased. So when I talk to the 50 or 60 or 70-year-olds, and they're like, I went to call my mom, but she died like 5 years before, and I didn't even. And you know who doesn't care? The alienator.
Yeah. This is so intense. And I know that there's got to be somebody listening, resonating with it. I can think of a handful of clients I've had that would probably resonate with it as being a child of someone who was alienated from the parent. There's 2 things that go through my mind, and I think it's really important that we make the distinguishment. The one is when a parent weaponizes the concept of parental alienation. So I want to use this as an example. Parents get divorced. Father, I'm going to use the term ex-husband, has displayed many tendencies of not being trustworthy. Okay. Infidelity inside the marriage, very contentious, high conflict divorce, lots of money involved, generally a not nice person.
Mhm.
When the kids go to visit with dad as per court order, dad is also not so nice to them. One example I can think of is I'm going to go play ice hockey with my buddies. But my skates and my ice hockey equipment's at dad's. So when I go to dad's, I'm going to get it. And this has been, one of my cases. And kid goes, gets the stuff when he's leaving dad's. Dad says, "No, I don't want you going to play ice hockey on not my time." And the kid's like, "Well, okay, but I'm going to take the stuff with me anyway." And before the kid even gets home, dad has called the cops and said that he stole ice hockey equipment from dad's house.
Mm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Kid does not want to go to dad's house. Dad's not safe.
Mhm.
Mom's trying to get kid to go because she knows it's court ordered. Kid's like
Yeah.
15, 16 years old, by the way. We're not talking like a middle schooler. And dad says to mom, "If you don't make him come to me, I'm going to claim parental alienation." So kid is saying, "I don't feel safe," has clear indicator he's not safe. Mom wasn't safe with him. Other brothers are grown and flown 18, 20, 22. They've left because they're like, "Dad, we don't want a relationship with dad because he doesn't leave us feeling safe." This kid's the lone guy. And dad is saying, "Well, if you don't come, I'm going to sue your mom for parental alienation."
Mhm.
So,
Those are really tough cases.
yeah,
And that I'd like to be able to give an answer like that, and I really can't. I mean, that is something where you have to look at the history of this documentation. I work with documentation with my clients now. Will tell you documentation can feel like a full-time job. I don't like it as a PI. I'm saying because what do PIs do? Everybody thinks we're with cameras and surveillance. Yeah, we did that kind of stuff. I get it. But we're about evidence. When I would go into a courtroom, judge doesn't care about my feelings, doesn't care what I think or
right.
feel. It was evidence, right? And when I went into a courtroom, interesting, one side loved me because I had the evidence, the other side hated me because I had the same evidence. Can you imagine you're loved and hated for the same thing? When clients go into the courtroom, they're in the hot seat, not like the lawyers. See, the lawyers will say, "Be good in court, it's great." Well, they're commanding the courtroom, okay? They're litigating, you're in the hot seat. So you have to make sure you have the correct evidence. If it's a one off with dad, it's not a big deal. I wouldn't make a big deal about it. But if it's a pattern,
It's a pattern. Right.
okay, then we have to document it.
Yeah.
And we have to document and we have to talk about the definition of abuse. Because I've had parents like, "Well, you know, he says bad things to the kid." Well, I'm going to say this. Nobody wants to hear it. The court said, there's no law against being a bad parent. Isn't that terrible? There's no law against being a bad parent. And when I first got into this profession and I worked with a lot of lawyers and I would say things like, "Yeah, but the dad called the kid a jerk." They're like, "No, no law against that," because there isn't.
That's right.
But if you can demonstrate a pattern of real abuse, I wish you were never born. I told your mother she should have had an abortion. Let's document those things.
Yeah.
Those are really
But
serious.
I
So
think
that's
it's
why I can't give you
important that
just
we
a
distinguish, because I am familiar with a number of cases where the marriage ended because the I'm going to use man, wife, father, mother in this particular case. You know, the marriage ended because dad and mom were not getting along. And part of the reason why mom and dad were not getting along, or husband and wife, were because there was different types of abuse occurring, right?
Sure.
Coercive control, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, the whole wheel. they're divorced, but now the kids are old enough to spot it themselves and they feel uncomfortable when they're with dad. Let's just say, for
Mhm.
example, they're trying to have agency and trying to have a voice and saying, I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe when I go. And the parents, like, well, I think you're just actually turning them against me. And so I'm going to sue you for parental alienation. And I've seen that as well, too. So I
Sure.
think to your point is the documentation is the key. Is that fair to say?
The documentation is the key. And also, I want people to hear this loudly. If you are starting to see this with a 10, 11, or 12-year-old, let's pop on it ASAP. With each year that the kids get older and older and older, the judges listen more and more to what the kid wants. Now, that doesn't mean if the child is 16 and they're in a terribly abusive situation that the judge goes, no, that's okay. They can be with the abusive parent. It's fine. But if kids get to be about 15, 16, especially when they start driving, if they say things like, I just don't want to go to dad's house. He's rude, he's obnoxious. I just don't want to go. The courts can say, okay, he's going to go. He has to go, but the kid's driving. The kids start to have their own lives. And the judges can only demand that the child go, even if they don't want to. And I've said to clients, like, do you want to sue your kid? Do you want to take your kid to court because they're not showing up to your house? So anybody who's starting to deal with this early in the game, do it while your kids are young, because you go to the court and go, Your Honor, this has been going on since they were like 8.
All right. And fair, listen, realistic question. Is it fair to say that if somebody suspects that this is what they're dealing with their spouse or their ex-partner, is it a fool's journey to think that they can do that on their own without strategic and logistical support from somebody that specializes in high conflict and parental alienation?
I think it's foolish
Yeah.
because this is not something you can do. You just can't. No, we're not trained as human beings to deal with a child who's turned against us. And by the way, parental alienation is nothing new. We see it in the hieroglyphics, we see it in the Bible, we've seen it throughout history. This is not a new concept. It's gotten more sophisticated because people get divorced, they live longer, relationships with children are different. In ancient Egypt, kids got married at 13. They don't now. So we have a whole different thing going on. All right. I say that a relationship between child and parent is cradle to grave. Their cradle, your grave. When you're going through divorce and all these people come in, the parent coordinators, attorneys for children, um, guardian ad litems, best interest attorneys, social investigators, evaluators. I call it the alphabet soup of custody situations. They all have different opinions. Everybody's head is spinning. The kids turn 18, boom, all off the table.
Yeah.
And now what do you have? Right? Because you call that judge, you call that parent coordinator, that kid is 18 and a day. They're like, sorry, the child's aged out. They're emancipated. Goodbye. See you later, alligator. So if you're seeing this when they're little, get somebody to help you with a strategy. People come to me, they always say, I know all about this. I watched Dr. Rami. I get it. I know all about it. Read all the books I know. I go, well, actually, you don't. It's not something that we're trained to do. It's a very unnatural thing to go through. Children love their parents. And oftentimes, when the kids get very vocal, 12, 13, kind of snarky with you, and you tell your friends, you're like, my kids are like that too. Well, yeah, because they start to individuate at 12, 13, 14. They're getting a little gutsy. But this is different
Yeah.
because if you're in a healthy marriage and you say to your spouse, by the way, Emily said this to me today. Dad comes in, did you say that to your mom? Guess what? There's trouble in Denmark, right? But with the alienated child, you can't discipline them anymore. Because if you say, hey, you said that to me, they get to put on the phone with the other parent. The other parent said, well, listen, now you know why I'm not with her. You can't stand her either. So they join in on the parade. So parenting, one of the things all my clients say is, I can't parent my kids anymore. I said, well, you can, but in a different way. Yeah, but it's not fair. Well, wrinkles aren't fair either. I see more every day. There's nothing we can do about it. It isn't fair. But what I also say is, let's get your ego out of this, because the kids are forcibly manipulated. Forcibly manipulated. They have no way to get out of this. And I have parents say to me all the time, Susan, I don't understand. Why don't they just tell their father? I go, what? You're scared to death of the guy. You've called the police enough times, or you got out of the marriage. What do you want a 10-year-old to do? Now, when these kids get to be 16 and the parent with the most money, which is usually the one doing the alienation, buys them a car,
Yeah.
and they all do it. They buy them a car, and then the child, and there's always a stipulation: your mother's not allowed in it. Or if the mother buys the car, dad can't be in, his wife can't be in, their kids can't be in it, can't be in it. So, what are these kids supposed to do? And the most important thing is they all get sick.
The kids.
So oh yeah. So everybody gets real, I don't say everybody. And I remember going to a conference once with Dr. Miller when he was still living, and they were talking about the emotional impacts of parental alienation on kids. And I raised my hand and I said, yeah, but what about the physical? He goes, oh, I could talk about that for 8 hours. And he probably could have. They all have some kind of anxiety, whether it's trichotillomania, we see the hair pulling, eyebrows, eyelid. We see exoriation, skin picking, we see cutting, we see drugs, of course, but we also see eating disorders, binging, purging, anorexia. But we really do see nail biting. We see the cutting. We see the self-inflicted pain kind of anxiety disorders. Do we see it in the general population? Of course we do, but we see it higher in this. And I haven't had a client whose kids are alienated who don't have something.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're trapped. They're trapped. They are in the high conflict divorce too. Remember, 85% healthy divorce, they don't do this to the kids. They
Right.
don't. Okay. But the 15%, and if you sit down with the targeted parent or the alienating parent, say, we really shouldn't do this. It hurts the children. I always say, do not be the accountability police. Don't start with them. They will ramp it up. They don't go, oh, you're right. I didn't realize I was hurting the kids by telling you you're the worst mother and you want to poison them. I'll stop tomorrow. It's not going to happen.
And is it typically the person who is trying to alienate the kids? How do I want to say this? The person that's bad mouthing the parent, can that also be the same person that files for parental alienation against the other parent? So, for example, kids don't want to go see, I'm going to use mom, dad again. Kids don't want to go see dad because they don't feel safe when they're with dad. Dad constantly badmouths mom. And the only reason why you want to even be with mom is, I've heard this, because she's too good of a mom. This is my favorite. She's too good of a mom. She never lets you guys figure anything out. She's too involved, to this, to that. Kids start deciding they don't want to be with mom. He's the one that's bad mouthing mom. She's not doing it. And yet he's the one that then takes mom to court to file for parental alienation because the kids don't want to see him anymore.
Mhm. Well, here's the thing. When you have a parent that's so invested in the other parent, light
Right.
bulb goes up, please. Okay, let's get that light bulb going. Because typically how it should work, guys, you go to dad's tomorrow. Okay, guys, I'm dropping you off. See you. Love you. Okay. And they go, right?
Right.
The parent is like, and your mother and stop it. Okay. The minute that happens, we know. So are they alienating? Are they They're too invested. And so something is going on. And I
Yeah.
would have to look at each individual case. Interesting. I had a guy call me several years ago and he said, I'm being terribly alienated. My 13-year-old wants nothing to do with me. My son. And I go, well, where are you located? He goes, well, I'm in Spain now. And his mother, I want his mother to put him on a plane to come see me, and she won't do it. I want him to spend a month in the summer with me. She's alienating, alienating, alienating. Well, I did the intake. Well, it turned out he left the mother and the son 3 years before to find his inner child. And he went to Israel and he like hung out with some friends. And then they went to France and then like they did some cycling. And then now he's in Spain. And I said, "Did you pay child support during this time?" "No, but," I go, "we're done. We're not doing this."
That's right.
Okay? There's no, I said, "She shouldn't put this kid on a plane to see you. You don't know this boy. He was 10 when you left. He's 13. That is a big change in this
But this is
child's life."
kind of my point, and I think it's so important that we have this discussion because it the concept, like you said, it's not new. It gets a lot of airplay now, which is why I wanted to bring it up because it's so common as this manipulative tactic within the
Mhm,
divorce realm, but
mhm.
not all scenarios fall underneath it, right? And so like you
Exactly,
just
exactly.
described like a perfect scenario, kind of like the one that I was describing, which is like the parents not parenting. They're not doing their
Right.
job. And now all of a sudden the kids
Exactly,
are like, "Oh, I call
exactly.
bullshit. I don't even want to go with the parent that doesn't parent." And then that guy's or that gal is the one that's calling for the parental alienation. How do you distinguish the difference? If someone's listening and they go, "What is the defining difference?" How
Okay.
does someone know that there's true parental alienation going on?
Great question. I love it. Okay. So what you're talking about are two different terms. One is called estrangement.
Great.
One's called alienation. So estrangement is when the child doesn't want to be with the parent and for valid reason. Okay. For valid reason. Alienation is when somebody has indoctrinated the child to no longer want a relationship with the parent. I call it ventriloquism. Hand is right up the puppet's back and the child's spewing what that parent
Good
says.
one. Yeah.
Because when a 6-year-old says, "I don't want to go to dad's house because his girlfriend's a whore," and I've heard that so many times, where does the 6-year-old hear it? Or a 9-year-old boy goes, "I don't like mom because, dad gives her all this money for child support and alimony and she decorated the living room. Like she's just using his money." 9-year-old boys don't think like that at all. Okay. It's not even in their purview. So those are really clear cut and we get it. Okay. And of course, there's different stages of alienation because when kids are under 10, the parent has to visit. They're not really part of the decision making. They get a little older and they're like, "I'm not getting in the car. I get with you." Children who are really abused, and I mean really abused, and Amy JL Baker has done studies about this. They have a very different affect than alienated kids. Very often they hide the fact that they've been abused.
Yeah.
"Where'd you get those cigarette burns?" The playground." "Did your mom leave you home alone last night?" "No, she was home." Okay. "Does dad yell at you?" "No, dad's really nice." Dad screams all the time. Now that's not all the time, but that's pretty consistent. Children who are alienated are very verbose. They have this lack of, and of course, there's something in the middle that I'll get to in a second, but they have this, "I'm not going to mom's house." Let me tell you what, she is about the worst. And they get into this narrative and they're so absolutely sure about it. And they have zero guilt about what this will do to her or how she feels about it. "Well, do you realize you haven't seen your mom in a month?" "That's right. No, I don't want to." She deserves it. Like, who does she think she is? And I've seen these kids behave like this.
Yeah.
In the middle, the child who's really been abused will say something like, "I love both of my parents. I really do. My mom is pretty good. My dad's just rough. He's rough and I don't feel real super safe." Like, and then here's the key. If somebody worked with your dad and on these issues and he promised not to be like that with you, "Oh yeah, well then I would." It's just like, I just don't like when he does that. The alienated kid, there's nothing she can do.
That's right.
There's nothing she can. Yeah, but what if your mom, cured cancer? No, mm-mm, no. So it's subtle, but
Yeah.
we
I
those
think
of us
it's
in
I'm
the
glad
space.
that we distinguish the between the two. And what I hear you saying is the language coming out of the child's mouth is not the child's narrative. It's the narrative that they've adopted when they've been alienated very often.
Well, and sometimes they'll say things that we we know. They'll share things about the extended family. I don't want to go to grandma's because you know what? The target, so the targeted parent is mom. I don't want to go to grandma's because you know what? She was a hippie. She smoked pot when she was what? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And she is going to make me take drugs. I'm scared of her. So parental
Yeah.
alienation is historically notoriously an action that is not only against that parent. I've said it in my TEDx talk. These kids aren't talking to the grandmother, the grandfather, the aunts, the uncles, the siblings. I have had several clients where the alienator separates twins,
I've seen that.
identical twins.
I've seen that. I've
Who
seen that.
does that?
Well,
What nice person does that?
that's right.
Because we know that twins, especially identical twins, they have a connection like nothing else.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have their own like little made up language when they're when they're little,
Yeah.
and to see them separated because somebody's vindictive.
I
And
had
I
a case
want to
where, and
okay,
she's publicly talked about this on the podcast. I had a client once who parents got divorced. She had a twin brother. Mom was dying of cancer. Dad leaves and takes the twin brother and leaves her to take care of mom. And she's like 12. And then it was only when mom was like within months of passing that he came back with the twin. So he could be the hero and, take her to the end of the road compassionately.
yeah, well, there you go. And I mean, like I've said I could talk about this for 24 hours straight without sleeping, without eating, and
Still not even get through half
I
of
would
them.
still not be through half of the stories
Yeah.
because I've seen so many of them. I've received so many letters, and the true person who hurts. And I want to quote somebody, an adult who reached out to me in November of 2023. She was in her 50s, and she said, "I need to talk to you." So I jump on a Zoom with her, and she said, "I was an alienated child." And she said, "I was 8. My sister was 10. So now I'm 54. She's 56." She said, "My father took us from our mother. It was a bad divorce. And um, when I was 10, 2 years later, my mother was in a really bad car accident. She almost died. And my father took us to the hospital to see her. She was in ICU, and they could only see one of us at a time. And my father and his brothers and his friends were outside of ICU praying for her to die. And he sent us in there, and he told us that when we saw her to smack her in her face and tell her to die." I said, "Did you do that?" She said, "No, but I did tell her to die." And she was conscious, and she said, "You don't mean that." And I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "I went home, my father," and I'm going to quote her. That's why. And she said, the alienator, they don't care about you. You're just something they use and then they abandon." End quote. I can't say it any better.
Yeah.
Okay. Her name's Shelley. I won't give her last name. She had a lot of trouble in life, alcohol, all kinds of problems, but she ended up getting married, having a daughter, and she and her husband do some wonderful work. They travel every year to Vietnam with a group of students, travel abroad kind of thing. She's never talked to her sister since then. Her sister has stayed with the dad. Her sister has had children. They're grown. Her sister has never met her daughter. So, as I said in my talk, this fractures families.
Yeah.
And that story really, I actually said, "Would you like to be on a podcast?" And she said, "Yes." And then she said, "I just can't." She said, "But tell my story." So I do. And the quote, or when I quote her, is, as I said, I couldn't say it any better because these children are being used. I also want your audience to know something. It doesn't matter if you're the one who left or they're the one who left. It is their behavior because so many people will say to me, "I don't know why he's doing this to me. He has a girlfriend. He cheated on me. He left the marriage. Why is he doing this?" Because one would think, okay, maybe he's just, or she, because, it goes both ways. Um, Wait, he's upset because I found somebody else, or I'm leaving the marriage. I don't want to be in the marriage. But guess what? It goes both ways, both ways. And I see more of he's the one that should be happy it's over. because we're going to roll back to it has to do with the personality of the person, and you can't change them.
Yeah. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so glad to have had you on today because your combination of your investigative skills and your coaching insight and your understanding of parental alienation, I think is very, very unique. I don't think you can find it in a lot of people, and I'm really glad that people are learning about you today. If this resonates with someone, what is a good way for them to learn more about the services that you offer?
They can reach out to me, go through my website. We're getting ready to launch a podcast called Before It Gets Ugly on our own YouTube channel. It'll be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as yours. We're launching it this month. And it's really about, starting the divorce process in the beginning. If you're getting a divorce, if you're seeing parental alienation, let's jump on it. And I'm not the only person who says this. This is lawyers who say it, because you want to have the home court advantage. You don't want to be blindsided. You don't want to have your head in the sand. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, just my social media is my name.
All right. So, guys, it's Susan Shofer. It's SusanShofer. That's how you can find her on Instagram. That's her website. It's susanshofer.com. The link will be right in the show notes. So we'll make it nice and easy for you. Susan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of it.
You're welcome. Everybody who's dealing with this, you can get past it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important, but I think it's important that people be educated on even what it is and really understand the nuances. So if they're in it, they know that there is actually a support system available to them. And Susan is in Maryland, but she works with people all over the country, over the world,
Canada, Australia, UK.
Myself included. So Susan can work with anyone, anywhere. And I think, it would be a foolish thought to think that you can go into that battle without the strategy that she could provide and the resources and the knowledge and the tools and the expertise, because it's not something you can even comprehend. So if you're going into battle with someone that's already been through the battle hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, it's the right thing to do. So again, it's Susan Shofer, SHOFER.com. Same thing on Instagram. Susan, thank you so much for being our guest today.